climate finance is a transfer of resources to developing countries to support their own activities. Climate finance is not the subsidies for private investments that, while they may be looking for greener outcomes, are fundamentally still profit-seeking investments driven by profit motives. So that's the fight we're having right now at the UN, at the Green Climate Funds, and I think in all kinds of international and development finance conversations writ large, is what's the role of the private sector? We're sort of having to defend the fact that public money is still really important. You can't expect private investment to reach the poorest of the poor. Fundamentally, a lot of climate adaptation activities are not profitable. And so this move from the US and other developed countries to say, well, the private sector is where all the money is and that's where we have to look, is really a move that absolves them of responsibilities that they need to own up to. And it's a move that is fundamentally going to harm the poorest and most vulnerable countries and people in those countries.
Mithika or Jackie, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think I just want to mention and corroborate what Brandon is saying. We have carried out a quick study on what really the US is funding in terms of climate finance, because it made a lot of commitment after Copenhagen. And this before the long-term finance. There is a tendency of channeling money to even climate-relevant projects in Africa. And a case in point, for instance, is a company in Nigeria where if you go to the where the United States had indicated that it has done a lot of finance on climate change, it, for instance, and to support 3 Coca-Cola bottling plants in Nigeria for quite a big, colossal amount of money, and around 70 million US dollars. So if you look at that, Obama will tell you, I'm really putting a lot of money in climate finance. But eventually you realize that it is not even so. Coca-Cola is their company. So you wonder what else would it have to do with the poor people in Nigeria and elsewhere. And so these are the patterns which we are seeing in these countries. We know that the corporate sector has a lot of influence on anything finance. And that's why we are really worried on the Power Africa program, Energize Africa program, and Electrify Africa program, because we know it is going to follow the same program. The GE was based in South Africa until last year. Now it has been transferred to Nairobi. They have opened, Nairobi, Kenya, it has opened a big office there. And we know why it has gone there. It is to strategically position itself for that windfall of that Power Africa program. We have been even questioning them in Africa and asking them really what are they doing with this? But they have been very evasive. And I hope that now with the link which we have with all the US partners, we are going really to expose some of this deceit which is being done and perpetuated by the government in the name of supporting people. So I think we have not yet seen this. It is going to intensify because in the future, with the establishment of the Green Climate Fund, I know all development financing is going to be the so-called climate-proofed. So there will be never anything which will pass without being climate-proofed, and a lot of money is going to be channeled. And that's why you see everybody is rushing into that, all corporations, because they know that is where the money is. So there is no end now. It is development cooperation. And when it comes to that, it is climate change and development cooperation. And we are really worried whether that will not lead to adaptation to communities which really deserve it.
So before we get to Q&A for the audience, I want to turn to our last question about how do we better link struggles here in the U.S. and in Africa. And I know that each of you are really in a leadership role within your own organizations. I know, and Jackie was really talking about how can we start to have these conversations so we're having holistic messages that say not here and not there, and what are the solutions that can work here and work elsewhere that we can all promote together. So I think talking about that common messaging, talking about the issue with GE is not just an issue of extraction and profits, but also what else are these corporate actors doing that we don't like? In the session on tax justice, we'll find that GE is not paying taxes here in this country and probably not in African countries either. So how can we effectively link our messages and our communities? How can we look at these corporate targets and promote the holistic solutions that we need? And what are some specific examples that you're finding in your own work of where partnership and linking of struggles is happening and is going well? Because it's easy to talk about this in the abstract, and I think a lot harder for us to figure out how we can do it together in practice.
So I think as it relates to corporate interests, I think one thing we do need to absolutely prioritize is getting money out of politics. I think we need to really look seriously at campaign finance reform here. We need to look at at the various ways that money rules our political structure and be very concerted in how we work on breaking that link. So I think that's absolutely a priority because we see the ripple effects globally of that relationship. I think in terms of our linkages together, as we said before, really having more of these types of dialogue, more of the type of dialogue that's happening in New York and that always happens around the UN sessions is important so that we can talk about our common ground and talk about our common messages, our common experiences. I think we also participate as we work towards models of strengthening local economies, because that's another way to take the power away from corporates, because right now the issue is the monopoly and the control of our energy system. And as we know, it's $1 trillion system, so there's a lot of money to be wielded in controlling our politics. But as we start to decentralize this kind of concentration of power and wealth, we can really see some changes as well. So I think it would be great for us to work together on what those models look like. For example, last year we participated in a global eco-village network meeting where folks were coming together who were building local economies at the community level, doing community-owned solar, doing community-owned waste recycling so that we're not doing waste-to-energy incinerators that are putting out pollution. And waste is also a huge industry in a lot of ways, and it's also a large way that we pollute. So how can we look at these different systems and think about ways that we can build control at the local level and work together across communities and countries to make that happen? So those are just a couple of examples, I would say.
Let me ask my African brother there on the issues of environmental issue you raised. When you're talking about most of the Western investors, moving in the oil and gas sector, moving to other African countries today, you have about more African countries where extraction is not taking place, oil and copper. And I want to know the kind of pollution you're trying to set up to actually fight these issues of climate change. And because, borrowing from what is really happening from Nigeria, most of the investors now are moving out of the Nigerian shore into other African environment, knowing fully well that they have also reneged in their environmental social responsibilities to where they are extracting this, the extractive industry that is established, and they are moving into the other. So what is the pollution you're trying to set up? To actually have a very strong center that can resist and make sure our environment is protected.
Yeah, I think that's a very legitimate question, and of course very complex, because I may not have a solution for it. What has happened in the Niger Delta, the crisis in even right now in Nigeria, has its roots from that extractive industry and oil extraction in the Niger Delta. You remember when the Mossop movement for the survival of Ogono people started, it started as a small thing. Then it went into the movement for the emancipation of Niger Delta, and then now we have Boko Haram. So if we are not able to link this, they are just resource related. And it is, if you look at Shell and those others devastated the whole environment, and in collusion with corrupt government officials, people are not being involved. And now that is the monumental problem which we are seeing. And so after now they are unable to go into that, now they are transferred, now the problem into other countries. So that's what you are saying. So how do we do that? It's because this, a problem such as that is never going to be resolved in Nigeria. And that's why the linkage with the United States movement and civil society to put pressure on these multinational corporations to fair practices and really consider human rights and even environmental justice and access to the people is recognized. Because in left alone to the Nigerian government and Nigerian civil society, they will be crushed. Most of them, Ken Sarawiwa and those others, when they started raising those issues, then they were executed, and many others who have not been named. So I see the only solution for that is this, the growth and the promotion of global justice movement, environmental movement, and this North-South collaboration. So that when we have, it is not going easy to be solved. And somebody was talked about here, about the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, that the civil society there and the people there are unable even to drive, but it was the missionaries which were able to put pressure on the government here until they acted on DRC. And same case, I'm seeing more solution even to here, that's if we have linkages with the US civil society and other actors, civil rights activists, then we are able to put pressure into those multinationals so that now we have them act and respect the dignity of the people.
I want to keep the conversation going about linking struggles and see if, Brendan, if you have anything to add to that, and then we'll take a stack of questions here for the panelists.
Thanks. I don't actually have too much to add, and I'd like to move to questions. I will say that on the policy level, because what happens in the U.S. has effects everywhere in the world, I think one of the best ways that those of us in the U.S. can be in solidarity with Pakcha and Mathika's folks and everyone else on the continent is pressuring the U.S. government on things that we're already pressuring them to do. So reduce our emissions at home, provide climate finance for folks abroad, those things that some of us are already working to do. We need to amplify those voices. We need to step up our game on those things. And there are a lot of things, there are a lot of policies that would benefit people in the States that could also have very positive effects for communities elsewhere in the world. So on the issue I work on, climate finance, again, as I said before, one of the things we hear from the U.S. government is, look, we don't have the money to just give out to other countries. Congress is not going to go for that, which is true. Congress is not going to go for that. We have to fight every year to preserve what we get out of Congress in terms of climate finance and foreign assistance and things like that. But there are policies that we are also fighting for in order to expand the pot of money. So a progressive carbon tax, for example, something that I think many folks in this room have worked on. The revenues for that could be used not just to benefit folks here, but also to meet our international climate obligations. A financial transactions tax is something that some of our organizations are working on, which would have incredibly positive and progressive effects here in the U.S. and would generate revenues that we could use to meet our international obligations. So there are a lot of sort of policy level things like that I think we can do that have effects well beyond our own borders. But I'll stop there.
Thank you. If we could take a few questions from the audience. Yes.